are so many beautiful things blooming outside right now, but here's how you can fill your home with some of that beauty by making flowers made out of paper. On today's show, I'll be showing you my top 10 coffee filter flower DIYs. Now, since I'll be demonstrating how to create each of these, this will be a long video, but you could look in the description tab below to click on a time mark to bring you straight to your favorite flower. Here's number 10, the Bluebonnet. This was part of a request I got to do a series of Texas flowers. Okay, I'm going to start with a stack of about 8 sheets of coffee filter paper, and I'm going to fold those in half. With a pencil, I'm starting from the bottom and I'm drawing a trunk that extends out to these fat branches with little rounded leaves at the ends. And what I'm drawing looks a lot like a coral reef. I'm continuing that all the way up to the top, and at the top I'll have little smaller leaves. I'm going to take my time and cut this out. I'm going to separate this stack into 2 piles, 4 sheets each. And I cut a long piece of floral wire, and I'm going to move it down about a ½ inch from the top and put some hot glue on the first 4 sets of sheets. And then I'm going to put a little hot glue on the wire and attach the other set on the other side of that. And I'm doing this in sections, so I did about 1 inch worth of hot glue. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to twist it around. I'm going to twist it a couple of times. Okay, so now I'm going to glue the next section about 1 inch down. I want a little hot glue underneath the wire and above the wire. And then I'm going to lay my top layer down and then twist some more. And we'll just continue that all the way down, a little glue, and then twist until we get to the end. And then we can ruffle those petals, and you'll have something that looks like this. Now, to color these flowers, I'm going to take them outside to spray paint them. But before I take these outside to spray paint them, I'm going to cover up the tips where I have the little petals at the top, because those are usually white and green. So I'm going to take a piece of some leftover coffee filter paper and I'm going to wrap it around the top and tape that so that it doesn't get spray paint on it. So I'm taking these outside to spray paint, and I am going to first push the petals upward so that I could paint the outside of the petals first. I'm using a satin finish spray paint, a natural green, and I'm spraying the bottom of the petals towards the stem green. Then I'm spraying the rest of the petals blue. And I'm using 2 different blues. You could use whatever blue you like. But I'm going to start with this lighter blue and then go over it again with a darker blue. I like to do that just to give it dimension, but you could just use 1 blue if you like. And I'm going to turn that over and spray the other side. But remember, I'm just spraying the outer petals. I want the inside to stay white. So while those flower pieces are outside drying, I'm going to prepare my leaves. So I'm going to dye some filters to make my leaves and stems. I'm adding green food coloring and just a little bit of water. I want it to be dark, so I'm just going to dilute it just a little bit and add a lot of food coloring. I'm putting a little yellow in here just to make it a more natural green. And then I'm going to soak the filters in. I want the filters to be as dark as possible because they're going to lighten up when they dry. And then I'm going to put these out on a cookie sheet and put it in the oven for a few minutes at about 350, maybe 10 or 15 minutes. Now when it comes out of the oven, it looks like this. The first sheet is pretty dark, but the rest are pretty light. But these will work for the leaves and the stems for this flower because they're actually pretty light green. So I'll take one sheet for each flower, and then I'm going to fold all of them in half. And I'm drawing a half a leaf starting at the top, and then 2 leaves going towards the bottom. And I'm going to cut those out and open it up. Now this flower has 5 leaves that look sort of like this. I'm folding the leaves in half to give it some dimension. I'm going to set those aside because now my flowers are dry. So to make my stem, I'm going to take one sheet from the colored paper and I'm going to tear it into strips. I'm using a little craft glue and a paintbrush. I'm painting one side of the sheet and wrapping it around the wire till I get all the way down to the bottom. Okay, next I'm going to put the leaves together by taking a little hot glue. I'm going to put some in the center, starting from the top leaf down, and then I'm going to press those 5 leaves together so that it makes a little, it fans out a little. Something like this. And the bottom stem goes at one point. Then I'm going to take one of the strips and I'm going to use the hot glue and sort of wrap that strip around the stem of the flower and cut it. And then I'll put a little hot glue on the large stem and wrap the leaf around that stem. This is an image of that flower with a leaf, what it looks like. And I'll just add one more leaf at the bottom here. Also with the strips of green paper, I cut out a few circles and I'm adding some of those to the tip of this flower. The green will help the tips look more realistic. And here's a quick spray painted version of the Bluebonnet. Now this is a quick spray painted version, but if you really want to make it look more realistic and more detailed, what you can do is spray paint it more blue. So spray paint all the pieces blue, inside and outside the petals. And then use some white acrylic paint to put large dots on the inside of most of the petals, and that will give you a bolder, more realistic look with more details. So now I can also add my Bluebonnet to my Texas bouquet. Number 9 on this list is the Easter lily. For this flower, along with coffee filters, I'm also using Q-tips and watercolor, also construction paper. I'm going to start by making the inside pieces of this flower, the stamen and the pistil, and I'm using Q-tip swabs for this. I'm using 7 pieces for each. I'm cutting the ends off of 6 pieces, and I'm taking the heads of 3 of those swabs and I'm going to glue those together. And then I'm going to glue the 3 head group to the end of one of the Q-tip pieces. And this will be my center pistil, and I made about enough for 6 flowers, and I separated all the groups of pieces. So now I'm going to paint all of these pieces to look like the center of the flower. I'm using watercolor and I'm mixing a little yellow and orange, and I'm painting the tips of each of the swabs. And for the middle pistil pieces, I'm painting that a light green. I'm also painting the stems of each piece green. Now I'm going to glue the 6 yellow pieces, the stamen just below and all the way around the centerpiece, the pistil. I'm using a hot glue for that, and then I am going to bend each piece downward in a curve all the way around. So I have something like this, and this will simulate the inside parts of our lily flower. So to make the petals for this, I'm pulling out 3 white coffee filters and I'm going to fold them in half. Next I'll draw a petal shape in the center and then I'll cut it out. Next, I'll fold those petals in half so that I have a crease right down the center of the petals. This will give me 6 petals when I separate them. I'm using a little craft glue, and I'm going to put some glue at the bottom of the petals. I'm going to take 2 of them and glue them together at about a 60-degree angle. Then I'll put a little glue right at the bottom between the 2 petals and glue a 3rd petal right on top of the 2 right in the center. And I'll do the same thing with the last 3 petals. Now I want to glue and wrap the bottom portion of the first set of petals right around one of my centerpieces. Then I'll glue and wrap the other set of the petals right around and in front of the first set. And I'm adjusting this to make sure all the petals are spaced pretty evenly and they line up symmetrically. And now I'm using a pencil to curve some of the tips of the petals downward so that they look more realistic like a real lily. Now a bouquet of lilies always have quite a few flowers that are not open, so I want to create those too. I am going to do the same process as I did to create the flowers with the petals, using 6 petals. But instead of using the pistils and the centerpieces, I'm going to take some excess paper, the extra paper, and I'm going to roll that up and put it inside the petals and glue the petals around that. And I'm gathering all the petals and I am closing them and closing them tight at the top so that it sort of goes around to a point. I'll squeeze the tips closed and I'll make a few of these so I have a few closed flower heads. Now to make the stems, I'm using utility wire, cutting a long piece and poking it into the bottom of the flower. I'm cutting strips of the coffee filter sheets, brushing the wire with craft glue, and I'm just going to wrap the paper around the wire, brushing on the glue to make my stem. Now instead of using dye or spray paint, I'm going to paint all of these with watercolors, and I'm just using diluted green and yellow. I'm painting the closed flowers first. I painted all the stems green, and this time I'm going to make some leaves using construction paper. I folded a green sheet of construction paper in half about 3 times, drew a leaf on and cut that out, and I'm cutting out some smaller leaves, and I'll glue the large leaves at the top and the smaller leaves closer to the bottom. I'm using a couple of different shades of green, and I'm gluing the leaves all the way down to the bottom. This makes the stems look more realistic inside a glass vase. I glued leaves on both the open and closed flowers. Now I have a beautiful bouquet of lilies that look great in any vase. Number 8 is my very favorite part of the Texas bouquet, the large yellow rose of Texas. For each of these roses, I'm using 4 sheets of coffee filters. Stacked together, I'm going to fold those sheets in half and then fold it in half again. Now on this section fold, I want to draw a nice large rose petal shape. Something like this. So I'm going to cut this out and unfold it. Now I'm going to separate the sheets, and I'm going to use 1 drop of hot glue in the center to glue each sheet on top of the other. But as I glue it, I will be rotating the petals so that they don't line up. Now I want to take 1 petal from the top layer. I'm going to start by using a skewer, and I'm going to just roll one end of it on one side of the lip, take the other end, stick my finger at the bottom and make sort of like a cone shape. And I'm going to put a little bit of hot glue on the other end of the petal to keep it closed so that the tip comes to a point. Now I'll take the petal that's across from that one, and I want to sort of roll that around that center pointy petal. So I'm putting a drop of hot glue on the center of one end of the petal, and I'll glue that to the center petal piece, and I'm going to put a little hot glue on the other end of this petal and sort of loosely glue that around onto itself. And now I have my center flower folds. Now I have 4 layers, and for the other 2 petals on that layer, I'm going to put a little hot glue in a V shape just at the bottom part of that petal and glue that petal around the center piece. And then I'm going to glue the petal that was right across from that around those petals. And you're doing the same thing with each layer. You're going to glue just the bottom part of the petal around the center, and then the next petal will be the one across from that. And then you'll have a flower that looks something like this. Now, to make this more realistic, I am going to use the skewer, or you could use a pencil, and I'm starting from the notch, and I'm going to roll the petals around the skewer. And I'm doing this for each side of the petal, and I'm rolling it at a slight angle, so that looks like a very realistic petal. And this is what it looks like after all the petals are curled. A very realistic rose. Now the last thing I'm going to do is cut the tip of this point so that it's inside the center of the rose. And it also helps to show the curves of the rose inside the center, making it look a little more detailed. And now to make my rose a nice big bright yellow, I am going to use acrylic paint, and I'm just diluting a small spray bottle with water and some acrylic paint. Use yellow and a tiny bit of red to make it a nice bright yellow, and I'm spraying it lightly all over. The fine mist from this tiny spray bottle works great, and I would just let these flowers air dry. Okay, so while the paint dries on all the flower heads, let's make some flower stems and leaves. I'm going to start with the leaves that are right below the head of the flower. So I'm using 6 coffee filters, 1 for each head, and I'm folding it in half again, and then folding it one more time. So I'm drawing this shape that's kind of like a short pointy leaf with a bulge at the bottom. Then I'm cutting that out, and I'm going to unfold that once, and I want to put little slits on the end. I'm also going to fold the leaves down the center to give it some dimension, and then open those up. So I'm going to use a push pin and push the pin right in the center so that I can put a piece of wire through this. I'm going to push the wire through the hole and have it go up maybe about 1 inch to a ½ inch, and put a little hot glue in that area to keep it in place. Now I want a little bulge at the bottom of the rose like most roses, so I'm going to take a scrap piece of coffee filter. I'm going to put some hot glue all the way around the center and roll that piece of paper around. Now I'm going to put some hot glue on the bottom part of the leaves and push those up against the bulge, and then I'm going to sort of flatten the leaves down. So now let's finish the rest of the stem. I'm going to take a coffee filter sheet and tear a few strips from it. And just like I did with my other flowers, I'm going to use some craft glue and paint it on the wire, and use the strips to wrap around the wire to make my stem. To make my leaves for my stems, I'm going to use 6 coffee filters, 1 for each flower, and I'm going to fold that in half, then fold it in half again. And starting from the top edge, I'm going to draw a half a leaf, then another leaf at an angle below it, and I'm going to cut that out. Then cut the leaf set down the middle. When I unfold each set, I have 3 leaves. Now I'm going to fold each of those leaves in half, the sets, and cut little slits on the edges. I'll separate all the leaves, and this will give me 2 sets of 3 leaves for each flower. I'm going to glue the first 3 leaves close to the top of the flower. The second set of leaves I'm gluing towards the center. The acrylics in the spray bottle didn't work as well on these as on the flowers, so I decided to take these out and spray paint them with a dark and a yellow green. And this will give me that nice, deep, rich, realistic color, which came out really nice. There's a nice dark color. It looks pretty natural. So I'm going to put these together with my yellow roses. So to attach my flower head to the stem, I'm going to take a push pin and stick it into the bottom of the flower. And it's going to be a little hard because I have dried hot glue at the bottom of this head, but I'm going to just twist it around. And then I'm going to take the point of the wire at the top of the stem and put hot glue on the tip of the wire and around the bottom part of the wire. So you want to hold that point over the stem and just twist back and forth until it goes all the way through and push it down. Then you're going to use hot glue to glue those small leaves up and around the head of the flower. Now to finish this off, I'm going to use a skewer to curl those little leaves that are around the head of the flower. And this is by far my favorite coffee filter flower. I make a lot of yellow roses because they look so realistic. And these yellow roses help to finish off my Texas bouquet. Number 7, tulips. For my tulip stems, this time I'm using green gardening wire. And I'm cutting a few long stems for my tulips. I'm going to start by taking the end of the wire and bending it over and in with some needle nose pliers to make a little bulge at the top. So I'm going to start by making the inside of the flower head. I dyed a few coffee filters with food coloring and water, yellow for the center and green for the leaves. And I'm folding this piece 3 times, and this will be the inside part of the tulip. So what I'm going to do is cut slits in this half circle here. I'm cutting the slits about a 1/2 inch, and I'm going to cut the bottom part off about 1 inch. And what I'm going to do is cut these in 4 so I can make 4 centers out of this. And I'm just going to hot glue it right around about 1 inch down from the top, all the way around. Since tulips have a little bulge at the bottom of the flower, I want to make the bulge by taking a sheet of coffee filter and I'm going to roll it into a tube. And then use the hot glue to roll that around and hot glue that right below the fringes. Now to make my petals, I'm going to use 1 coffee filter sheet per flower. I'm going to fold it in half, then fold it in half again, and fold it in half one more time. Now I'm going to draw a tulip petal on this piece and then cut it out. Then I'm going to cut just a tiny little piece off the tip to make a little hole in the center of these paper petals. Now, tulips have 6 petals and this is 8, but this is the easiest way I found to make the tulips, and it still looks like a tulip. But I want to make sure that all the leaves are separate, so I'm going to cut wherever any of them are connected. Okay, now I can attach my petals to my flower. I'm just going to push the stem through the hole and push the petals all the way up to the bulge. I'm putting a little hot glue around the bottom part of the bulge to connect the flowers. And I'm going to press the petals down on that. Now starting with the first petal, I'm going to put a line of hot glue on the bulge and then press the petal up towards the top of the flower. Then I'm going to move over, skip a petal, and do the same thing to the third petal. Then I'm just going to keep alternating petals so that I have something that looks like this. 4 petals down and 4 petals up. Then I'm going to take my first petal that's down, put a little line of hot glue between the 2 that are up, and then I'm going to sort of overlap that and push the petal that's down up over it. Then you get petals going up over in layers. Now to make the petals look more realistic, I'm using a pencil to roll the petals inward. Also pinching the tips of them so that they're sort of curved at an angle. And this is what my open tulip will look like. Of course, I also want some closed tulips in this bouquet, so what you can do is just put a little hot glue on the petals higher up and close those. Close the flower with your hand and sort of glue them together and turn the petals inward, and you'll have a nice closed petals. This is one open and one closed. I like using this gardening wire too for the flowers because it's nice and thick and you can curve it like the tulips. Now to make the leaves, I am going to fold some coffee filters I painted or dyed green in half, and I'm cutting it right down the seam, and I have these nice big leaves. I can do several of them different sizes by just folding the sheet. So I'm going to do a couple of these, and I'm going to glue these 2 leaves around the bottom edge of the stem. Hot gluing a bigger leaf around a smaller leaf. And I have something like this, and after doing this several times I have this whole bouquet of white tulips. When I'm using a glass vase, I like to cut lots of leaves and put inside. It makes it look a lot more realistic. And of course you can dye or paint your coffee filters many different colors and make some beautifully colorful tulips. Number 6, filler sprays. Now fillers are pieces of flowers like sprays that you add to your bouquet to fill in spaces or to add some color. So I'm going to show you how to make these very simple pieces that you could add to your coffee filter bouquets. So I'm going to start with a natural color filter to make a natural color and quick and easy filler. I folded the filter in half, then I'm going to fold it in half again the long way and then fold it back kind of accordion the long way. And I have this sort of cylinder looking shape. I am going to just cut slits about an inch, a half inch long and 1/4 of an inch wide all the way across. A skewer for my base, and I'm going to put a little hot glue at the tip and just start rolling the fringed coffee filter around, and I'm rolling it around at an angle downward, and I'm going to keep adding some hot glue as I go down and roll it around. And it's as simple as that. And next I'm just going to ruffle up the pieces and I'm done. Now if you want to make these pieces bendable or flexible, you can just use wire and do the same process. Just wrap the fringe all the way around with a little hot glue, and that way you can bend it whichever way you want and have more flexibility in your bouquets. Of course, I also dyed some coffee filters with food coloring in different colors, orange and green and yellow, so that I'll always have a whole variety of fillers for all of my bouquets. Number 5, Wisteria. Using a simple coffee filter method, this Wisteria will even be great for outdoor events and last for a while out in your yard. Okay, so for each flower branch, I'm going to use 8 coffee filters. I'm going to flatten these out and draw 3 different size circles. I'll be using this margarita glass because it works perfectly. The first circle is my biggest one, and a diameter will be about 4 3/4. Now right below that, I'll trace the bottom part of the glass, and a diameter of this area is about 3 inches. Now on the side, I have space for a smaller circle, and I'm going to use another glass for that. Now since I still have some extra space on this filter, I think I'm going to use that space to draw some leaves. I'd also like to create leaves that come out of the top of the flower branches. So in that area, I'm drawing a little stem with 3 leaves, and this is what my coffee filter looks like. So now I'm just going to cut those shapes out, and I'll have sets of 8 pieces for each shape. But first I'm going to bend the top part of the leaves inward just to give them a little dimension. So I'm using this thin flexible wire as sort of a branch for the leaves, and I cut 10-inch pieces. Now I'm folding the wire about 1.5 inches down, and then I'm going to fold this over again about half that size to make 2 sort of sticks that extend out from the branch. So I'm going to twist the larger part around the end of the wire. So now I'm going to attach my leaf shapes to the ends of the branches with hot glue. And then I'll have something that looks like this. And I'll put a leaf on the other end and one right below to hide that twisty part in the center, and I'm going to put another leaf closer to the bottom of the wire. And I have 8 cut out leaf pieces, so I have enough to make 2 of these for each set. Okay, so now let's work on the flowers. I'm going to start with the largest shape, and I'm going to fold that in half and fold it in half one more time. Now I'm going to use my pencil to draw the largest petal shape of the wisteria. So the petal's going to look something like this, and I drew a little bit of a neck going towards the point of the fold. And now I'm going to cut that out and unfold that once, and I'm also going to bend the petals here just to make them a little more dimensional. And then I'll unfold them completely, and I have something that looks like this. Now I'm going to do the same thing to my next shape down, and I'm going to draw that same petal shape but just a little bit smaller. Then cut that out. Now for my smallest shape, I'm going to fold that twice also, but this time I am going to draw a different shape. This is more like a teardrop shape with a stem, and it looks like little crosses when you unfold it. Okay, so now I have my petal pieces ready to assemble, and I'm starting with my large pieces. I'm going to take 2 petal shapes at a time, and I'm going to put one shape on top of the next, and I'm going to rotate it a little so that the petals are not lined up. Now with that same flexible wire, I cut 18-inch long pieces, and I made a bend here about 6 inches from the back. Anyway, I'm going to take my flower, I'm going to punch a hole in it using this push pin just to make it easy for me to slide the wire through the petals. So I'm going to slide that all the way down to the end to where I made my mark, and this is where I want the flower to start, 6 inches down from the top of the wire. And then I'm going to squeeze the ends to make a flower that looks like this. Now I'm going to take my next two pieces of the same shape and I'm going to do the same thing. Then I'm going to push those petals all the way down towards the last petals. But I'm going to use my fingertips at the very end of the last flower to measure where to start the next petals. So I'm going to push that down towards my fingers, put a little hot glue there, and then pinch the bottom to make another flower. And you see I have a little bit of a space, almost a half an inch maybe, between each flower. So I'm going to repeat this 2 more times since I had 8 of these petal shapes, and I'll have 4 of these large flowers towards the back. Now I'm going to repeat the exact same process with the smaller size down. I'm adding 4 of the medium-sized shape, space a fingertip apart, and then I'm going to do the same thing with the smallest shape. And now I have my wisteria flower piece that looks like this. Now for my final step, I'm taking these outside and I'm spray painting them. I'm starting with the leaves, and the color that I'm using here is called Eden. I also have a lighter version of this natural green, which is called Joshua Tree. For the flowers themselves, I'm using the same brand paint, satin finish. I'm using the colors lilac and grape. For these flowers, I'm lightly spraying them on each side, but I'm not spraying them completely covering each petal. I want actually the inside of the petals to stay white. It'll make it look more realistic, give it dimension. Plus the wisteria flower, usually the inside of the petals are white or a lighter color. So I attached these pieces to a trellis outside, and I had it really full at the top and had it tapered down at the sides. And I placed the green leaves mostly around the outside. The paper, the colors, everything held up really beautifully all summer, and it looks so beautiful against the backdrop of my hydrangeas. So even though this is paper, I think it'll be perfect for any event. Number 4, sunflowers. I'm going to start by making the centerpiece of my flower. I'm taking 6 sheets of this natural colored coffee filter paper. I'm going to fold it in half, and then I'm going to fold it in half again. Now I'm going to use my scissors to cut little 1/2-inch slits all the way across the top of the sheet. And I'm cutting these slits really close together. Then I'll brush my fingers across the top to fan them out and separate the pieces. Now I'm going to unfold it once and loosely roll it around itself to make what looks like a cone shape. And I'll add a little hot glue on the end to close that up. The center of a sunflower is indented, so I'm just going to use my fingers to push the center pieces in to make a round flat center. I made a couple of center pieces. Now I'm going to paint it with a dark brown watercolor paint. I'm painting the very center a really dark brown, and the outer edges are going to be a lighter brown. So I'm going to dilute my paint with water. And for some variation, I'm going to do one where the outer edges are dark and the inside circle is a lighter brown. Or sometimes the inside of the sunflower is green, so you could play with a lot of different versions. While that is air drying, I'm going to work on my petals for my sunflower. For the petals, I'm using 3 white coffee filters, and I am going to fold them in half, then fold them in half again, and I'm going to fold them 2 more times. That's 4 folds. And now I'm going to draw a sunflower petal shape. And then I'm going to cut that shape out. And right at the bottom, I'm going to cut about 1/4 of an inch to create a circle at the bottom of these petals. Now, sometimes the petals will be attached, so you want to just cut down the center of any petals that are attached. And next, I'm going to fold the petals right down the center just to give it a little dimension. Then I'll separate each one. I'm going to put them on top of each other, but rotate the petals so that they're not lining up. Then I'm going to take my cone-shaped center and push it through the hole of the petals. Now, with the petals out of the way, I want to put some hot glue right at the edge of the centerpiece all the way around. And then I'm going to push the petals right up against the edge of the center. All the petals are facing upwards, so I'm going to put a little hot glue on some of the outer petals to just to glue the ones that are flopping down upward. And then if you like, you can go around with your fingers and curl some of the petals inward or outward and make it look more realistic. Now, I just use white and all natural coffee filters, but of course you can make colored sunflowers any color you like. With this, I'm using some watercolors and water, and I'm just gonna squirt that in a bowl of water and mix that up, make a nice yellow, and soak my coffee filters in the yellow. And then I'm going to put this on a cookie sheet. I also want to add a little orange in the center, so I'm going to just brush on a little red and let that soak into the filters with some water. So I want to have a nice gradation from orange to yellow at the tips, and I'm painting both sides of the filters and just letting it soak in. And I'm going to put some more yellow on the edges to make it a brighter color, because these are going to dry a little bit light. While I'm doing this, I'm also going to dye some green coffee filters for my leaves and my stems. So I put these in the oven for a few minutes and let them dry. So I have some filters to make my yellow sunflowers and my green leaves. And this is what it looks like with the yellow petals and green leaves. For the green leaves on the back of the head, I did the same process as I did with the petals, but I drew a different smaller leaf shape and cut that out. And added that piece to the back of the head of the flower behind the petals. Now, instead of cutting a hole in the green paper, I cut the bottom off the head of the flower. I put some hot glue around the edge and the sides of the petals, and I put the paper with the green leaves around that. Now, in this version, I'm using colored tissue paper instead of the coffee filters. So you can also use colored tissue paper too instead of dyeing the coffee filters. And I am putting this down in layers just like I did with the petals, and folding them and moving them so that they look more natural. Now for the stems, I'm using this green garden wire. I'm going to push that into the back of the head and put a little hot glue there. I'm also using some tissue paper, or you could use a coffee filter paper, and wrap the stem with the colored paper. I also cut some big leaf shapes. I'm going to fold it in half and fold it accordion-like and make some leaves. Now this is so you can see the difference between the colored tissue paper and the painted coffee filter paper, which is on the right. And here is my beautiful sunflower bouquet. Number 3, peonies. The peonies I'm making are about mid-bloom, so I want to be able to see the centerpiece. So I'm going to start with that first. I'm using one natural color coffee filter, and I'm going to fold that in half. Then I'm going to fold that in half again and then cut that in half. I'll only need 1/2 of this sheet for the center of this flower. Next, I'm going to cut little slits at the top of the sheet about 1 inch long. Then I'm going to put a little hot glue in the center and roll it in on itself. To make my petals, I'm using white coffee filters. I'm taking 4 of these filters and I'm going to fold them in half and fold them in half again. And as I'm folding these, I'm cutting along the folds about halfway down. And then I'm going to fold that one more time and cut along the fold. And now I'm going to draw a petal shape, then cut that out and open it up until it's halfway folded. You can see the center part right here is connected, so I'm just going to cut that down to the size of the rest of them. Now while it's still folded halfway, I'm going to use my pencil to round my petals, fold them inward. Now I'm going to open this up and separate the sheets and rotate each petal so that they don't line up. Now I'm going to fold this back in half, and I'm going to take one of my centerpieces and place it down, halfway down, about 1 inch from the right side. I'm attaching that centerpiece with a little hot glue, and then I'm going to roll tightly around the centerpiece and then loose as I go outward. Then I'll put a little hot glue at the bottom end. Now starting with the bottom petals, I'm going to go around and open up each petal from the outside to the inside. Then I'll use a pencil to curl some of the petals upward. Instead of making the leaves this time, I picked up a bushel of artificial leaves. So I'm cutting the stem and I am going to twist the bottom of the flower, cut it near the head, and add a little hot glue to attach it to the leaf stem. I also hot glue the leaves to the flower head to keep it in place. And now I have some really pretty white peony flowers. To make some colored flowers, I'm going to use watercolors. This time I think I'm going to make the centerpieces yellow, and I'll make the flower yellowy orange color. I'm painting the filters before I fold them, and I'm doing more of a red in the center as it goes out to yellow on the edges. And I'm just using more water to blend the colors in. You can create a lot of different beautiful colors. You could also just brush on a little watercolor on the finished piece. Just paint it on lightly, however you want. This one I'm going to let air dry. The other sheets I'm just going to stick in the oven to dry for a few minutes. And after they dry, they come out like this, a little bit lighter. And after putting them together, I have a variety of peonies. When they're all put together, they make really lovely, realistic bouquets. Number 2, simple tea roses. Now this is the simplest method of making a very quick and realistic rose. I'm using a stack of 6 coffee filters, folded in half again, and folded in half one more time. So I'm cutting out a very simple rose petal shape right at the top of these filters. I'm going to open these up, and I'm going to start by dyeing these. I'm going to dye them a light pink color, so I'm using food coloring this time. I'll put a few drops of red. I'm going to soak my cut filters in the solution. It's a nice red color, but I want the tips of my flowers to be a darker red, so I'm just going to go around and brush on a little food coloring and dab it in to kind of blend it so that it looks something like this. I want to make a few different colored roses, so I'm doing yellow and violet, and I'm going to put these on a cookie sheet and put them in the oven for about 15 minutes to dry. I also cut out some leaf shapes, and I'm going to paint those a dark green with the food coloring. So I put these in the oven with the petals, and this is what they look like after they dry. So to make my tea rose, I'm using 3 sheets of the dyed paper. I'm going to stagger them on top of each other so the petals don't line up. Then I'm going to fold it in half and fold it in half again. Then I'm going to open this up slightly, and on one half of the folded sheets I'm going to grab 2 layers in the bottom corner, almost at the end. I'm grabbing that with tweezers, and I'm going to start twisting it around the tweezers. I'm holding the tweezers in the center while I twist with my hand at the bottom and rotate all the petals around to make a center like this. And you get a little quick tea rose. Now I'm just going to go around from the bottom and just fan out the petals. And then I'm just going to put a little hot glue on the end to close that up, and you get a nice quick little tea rose that looks pretty realistic. Now this time for the stems, I'm going to use some floral sticks, skewers, and some floral tape. But you could use a wire or whatever you want. But I'm just going to stick this stick from the center down the middle of the flower. Then I'll use a floral tape to just roll around from the top of the flower all the way down to the bottom of the stem. Now I'm going to use my leaves that I dyed green, the coffee filter leaves. I'm going to cut some pieces to go at the top of the flower and some leaves to go on the side. I'm using this floral tape to wrap that around. Then you could curl and bend the leaves to make it more realistic. Or if you want, instead of the green sticks, you can use some green floral wire to make the stems more flexible. Then you can wrap the floral tape around that. And here are my quick and simple little tea roses. They're very lovely, easy, and realistic enough to display on my table. Now this brings us to our number 1 coffee filter flower and my personal favorite, the hydrangea. To make my hydrangea, I'm going to start by dyeing my coffee filters like an undertone of greenish yellow. So to a bowl of water, I'm adding a few drops of green and yellow food coloring. I'll soak the sheets, lay them out on a cookie sheet, and put them in the oven to dry for 15 minutes at 350, and I get these very light green sheets. And that's just enough to add a little color to the underside of the petals. So I'm going to work with 2 sheets at a time. I'm going to fold that in half and then fold it in half again. At this point I'm going to cut the sides here because I want my petals to be separated. So I'm going to cut almost all the way down, and then I'm going to fold that in half again and cut the side of that fold. Then I want to fold it one last time, and I'm going to cut down that line. Now I'm going to draw a hydrangea petal shape right here at the top. It has about 4 petals, so I'm just going to do something simple with 4 petals. And it has a little neck that tapers out to the shape of the bottom. Now I only use 2 sheets at a time because I have a few folds in this and it makes the paper really thick and hard to cut. But for each hydrangea you're going to need 8 sheets. So I'm going to do this process again 3 more times to get my 8 sheets. And here's what my little cutout flower looks like. And when you unfold it, it looks like these funny little paper dolls. Now to color these, I want these to be blue. I'm going to lay them down, and I'm just going to color the outside petals. I'll just use my food coloring and squirt a little in this container, get a brush, dilute it with water, and I'm going to just paint blue on the petals, the tips of the petals. These were the rest of the sheets that I cut out. And that blue is a little dark, so I'm making these a little bit lighter. Plus I'm adding a little dot in the center of each one to make it look more like the hydrangea flower. I'll also do some green and some violet ones. I'll also be making some large hydrangea leaves, so I'm just going to trace an actual hydrangea leaf and cut that out. Cut a bunch of those out. I'm going to put some notches on the edges to make it look more realistic. And I'm going to paint these leaves as dark as I can get them with the food coloring. And this is what my painted filters look like after they dry. Now to make my flower, I'm going to open these up 8 pieces. And I am going to rotate each piece so that the petals don't line up. I'm going to take that group of 8 and I'm going to fold the whole thing in half. And then I'm going to start rolling that on like a cone. I'm going to start on one end, tight in the beginning and then loose as I go out. And then I'll put a little hot glue on the end to close it up. And lastly, I want to scrunch up the petals and just sort of fluff them around to make them a little more realistic. And that's how I make the head of the hydrangea flower, and it looks pretty convincing at a distance. Now these are my leaves after I dried them. What I'm going to do is just fold them in half, and I'm going to do like an accordion fold in this to make it look like there's veins in it. And when I open it up, it looks like almost like a real leaf. Now to put my flower together, I am going to cut off the end of this flower head and put a little hole in it. And then I'm going to stick a gardening wire through that. I'm going to tape it, or you can hot glue it there. Then I'll wrap this piece with floral tape. Attach my leaves with tape and floral tape. And you can create a bouquet of hydrangeas that look just like we picked them out of the garden. And that is it for my top 10 coffee filter flowers. If you want to see the full video for each of these, or written instant downloadable instructions with templates, look in the description tab below, and there's a link to each video along with a link to my Etsy store where you can get the downloadable instructions. Need a little more detailed instructions on some of these projects? On my Etsy store, for just a few dollars, you can get instant digital downloads of full color step-by-step instructions with templates for some of your favorite projects. And check out my Amazon page where you can pick up my multi-surface acrylic metallic paint, back in stock with 8 beautiful shimmering colors. You can mix millions of colors and create endless home beauty for indoor and outdoor projects. And while you're there, pick up my Book of Elegant Home Crafts Volume 1 with all your favorite projects together in one big beautiful colored step-by-step instruction book. On my Amazon page, you'll see all my favorite crafting tools and supplies used on this show, and you can add them all to your cart for the one-click fast and easy shopping and delivery convenience of Amazon. I'll be working every day to make crafting fun and easy for you. Follow me at Your House of Home and Your House of Home TV on all social media for extra home, food, and gardening tips.